Have you ever heard something you weren't supposed to? A whisper in the dead of night that couldn't have come from anyone or anything living. I wasn't always a believer in the supernatural, but one night in my new apartment changed everything. And now, I wish I had never moved in or listened to the voices in the walls. It all started a week after I moved into this old apartment building. The place had character-chipped walls, creaky wooden floors, and narrow hallways that twisted through the building like a maze. But for the price, I couldn't complain. Plus, the landlord had given me a generous discount for signing a year-long lease. It seemed like the perfect deal. That was until the first night. I had just settled in and packed a few boxes and was lying in bed when I heard it, a whisper. At first, I thought it was my neighbors in the apartment next to mine, their voices muffled by the thin walls. But as I focused on the sound, I realized it wasn't coming from the other side of the wall. It was inside it. The whispers were soft, like someone was just inches away, speaking directly into my ear. It was gibberish at first, incoherent murmurs that made no sense. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to race. I strained to listen, hoping I could convince myself it was my imagination. But the whispers continued, clearer this time.
Help me!
I jumped out of bed, every hair on my body standing up. My pulse pounded in my temples. Was someone trapped in the walls? No, that was impossible. I pressed my ear to the cold plaster, holding my breath, nothing. I stood there, frozen, until I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just tired from moving. I turned off the light, crawled back under the covers, and forced myself to sleep. But even as I drifted off, I could feel eyes watching me from the darkness. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and the noises from the busy street below drowned out any memory of the previous night's whispers. I laughed it off, convinced it was nothing more than a bad dream. But the following night, the voices returned. This time, they were louder. They didn't stop when I turned on the lights. They didn't stop when I knocked on the walls, hoping to scare off whatever or whoever was making the noise. No, they only grew more frantic, more desperate, and then I heard it. A different voice, one that wasn't just whispering.
Get out.
I froze. My skin crawled, a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. This wasn't just some prank. There was something here, something watching me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch in the living room, every light in the apartment on, waiting for the sun to rise. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, but deep down, I knew something was horribly wrong. The next day, I called the landlord. I asked him if the building had any history, maybe it was old plumbing or faulty wiring. He was quiet for a moment, then he sighed.
I don't usually tell new tenants this, but there was an incident here a few years ago. A couple in the apartment below yours, they didn't make it. They were found in the walls. They'd been dead for weeks before anyone realized. Some people say they were trapped. The police never figured out how they ended up there. But
what?
Some say they still haunt the place.
That night, the whispers returned, more aggressive than before. It wasn't just one voice, now it was dozens. I could hear their nails scratching inside the walls, their breaths ragged and close. I tried to ignore it, but it felt like they were all around me, watching, waiting. I ran to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My reflection stared back at me in the mirror, but something was off. Behind me, in the faint outline of the steamed glass, I saw them. Two figures, pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow, their mouths twisted in silent screams. They were standing right behind me. I spun around, nothing. That was when I knew I couldn't stay here anymore. I grabbed my keys, ran out the door, and didn't look back. As I fled down the stairs, I heard one final whisper. You can't escape us. I moved out the next morning, but even now, in the dead of night, sometimes when everything is quiet, I can still hear them, whispers, just beyond the walls.